Welcome back to Educator.com. What we're going to talk about now is creating page layouts with HTML and CSS. And I have a little slide here to show you and give you an idea or a base on what the jobs are, what role each piece holds in creating our web page layout. HTML has a job and CSS has a job. And between the two of them, they work together to create our page layouts. So what I have here is an example of a page layout, and it's a very simple one, as you can see. We have a basic outer wrapper, which is this piece here, all the way surrounding the content. So just think of that as a wrapper or a container for our content on our web page. And that's what this wrapper piece is referencing. So within that wrapper, we have 4 different areas of content. And each one of those is created in a particular way. So let's take a look at the jobs of HTML and then the job of CSS. So what are the HTML tasks that need to be done? Well, what HTML does is literally create each one of these boxes on the page. And what we've done is assigned a name to those boxes. Now, the way you assign a name to the box is using an ID. And that ID is a selector in CSS. So basically, the tag or the box of content has an HTML tag. And to that tag, we assign a name. That allows HTML and CSS to both understand what we're talking about. Now, the tags you normally use for working with these boxes on the page, back in XHTML days, it was always a div. But HTML5 has some new tags to use, such as header, footer, article, section, aside. These are different regions of a page. So HTML5 gives us a few more tags to use for our boxes. Up until this point, it was always a div tag. So that's the HTML side. We create our tags. Then, using those tags, we allow CSS to hook into them with that ID. So what does CSS do? It assigns format and positioning to those boxes. It uses that ID. So we have an ID up here, we have an ID down here. It allows the two to communicate. So the ID assigned in the HTML tag becomes the CSS selector, and what the selector does is tell the page which content to style. So which content? In other words, what area of the page are we going to reference? And then once we understand what area of the page, what is it we're going to do to it? Properties and values are the pieces that tell CSS what to do. And that's no different than our formatting piece. Just remember, CSS is always added to HTML tags. So the HTML has to be there as our base and foundation in order to do that. What I want to do is give you some code examples before we get started working in Dreamweaver creating these boxes. So let's take a look at that. What is the HTML code that needs to happen on our page? So here it is. This is an example of that code. HTML code creates the boxes. Now I actually have 2 different versions here. This left one is XHTML code. Notice it uses div tags only. Most of the time, those div tags are there. The content goes inside the div tags, and you assign an ID to the div. So the div tag is just used over and over again. So you can see that a div you can think of as a box of content. In HTML5 code, it's not necessarily that way. Notice we are using an outer div as the outer wrapper for our page. However, we're using an HTML5 header tag, HTML5 nav tag. These are all new tags. Here's another header. Here's another nav. So you have the ability to use whatever tags you want, and it is possible to use multiple header and multiple nav tags within your code. Those need to be assigned an ID, and within that ID, that's how you can reference it, or you can just use the basic tag itself. Since this is a tag, each one of these, I can assign an HTML tag as a selector. Over here, what we're doing is assigning an ID as the selector. So let's take a look at that code. So here's the CSS site. Notice here's our wrapper ID that was assigned to our box. Here are our header, and that was assigned as a name referenced in an ID. And here's my nav. We have a content ID and we have a footer ID. So let's put this all together. Here's my completed code. So we have our XHTML example here, or our HTML5 example. Here is some CSS associated with the XHTML example. So what we're doing is, see, here's our footer, our content. Footer goes with footer. Content goes with content over here. They all line up. Here's my nav. Here's my nav over here as an ID. Here's my header ID. Here's my header ID. And then we have the outer wrapper that goes around the entire piece of content. So that is creating page layouts with HTML and CSS. Each of these technologies, HTML has its job, CSS has its job, and the two work together. Just know that there has to be some kind of a connection between them, and that is all done at the code level right in this area. So HTML and CSS work together, creating boxes of content on your page that you can then position using your various properties and values within CSS. So that's an overview of how HTML and CSS work together to create CSS page layouts.